Thank you. So now moving on to our next session, I would like to invite Professor Ajay Dudani. Sir, do we have you here?
Yes, I'm there. Hi.
We will be starting the session. Over to you, sir.
Yeah. So good afternoon, everyone. And today we are going to talk about the burning issue which is there with my colleague, Dr. Abhishek Kothari, who's there also. And so the topic which we are talking is what are the protective measures we need to, how we need to modify our practice patterns in this COVID pandemic, and how we need to sort of, everyone has got a new normal now after this COVID which has come up. We are all living our lives differently. We are, every step of our living has changed. So how has our practice changed, especially the ophthalmic practice in the OPD, in the OT, and teleconsultation? What are the differences we have, modified in our style of working? So this will be like, a very interactive session. Everyone can be free to ask questions and discuss. We have various speakers here. I am one of the speakers, and I'll be speaking on the protective measures which we can use in our day-to-day practice against COVID-19. Then we have Dr. Raju S., who will be speaking on air handling and circulation in OPD and OT. And as we are aware that now this disease is more airborne rather than droplet-borne. So I think this forms a very, very important part of the session, which Dr. Raju Sampagi will tell us properly. Then we have a young dynamic surgeon from Jaipur, Dr. Abhishek Kothari, who was the brain behind this course. And he's going to talk about how UVC light is going to help us in this COVID war. And after his advice, I have installed multiple UV lights in both my OPD and my OT. Mrs. Deepa Kothari will talk to us about how do we run our OPD and OT smoothly in this troubled times, when we have second wave, then now third wave, we really don't know what's happening, It's such extreme times of uncertainty which we have. And last but not the least, we have Dr. Rushad Shroff, who will be telling us about teleophthalmology in COVID consultation. So patients are scared. I have seen, at least in my practice, the elderly patients are so scared, the AMD patients, to come for their injections also. So how we can teleconsult them and put them at ease and, tell them how to come during the safe way in the safe time during the OPD. So over to Abhishek. I think I would want him to also give us a brief overview of this program, his perspective, and then we could move ahead as per the program.
Thank you so much, sir, for the kind words. And I think the clinic is basically a changed place. After COVID-19, it's no longer what it was earlier. And therefore, we all need to be aware of the changes that we need to do in the way we think, approach, and handle our patients in both the OPD and the OT. And towards that objective, we thought we can discuss the various aspects that have come to light, have come into focus once COVID has hit us, and the end is nowhere in sight.
Yeah.
So we basically need to be prepared. To that extent, I think all of us here would love to share what we are doing, what particular aspects what all we are doing to protect ourselves. And I think it should be a useful talk, and everyone should basically be able to take home certain things that they can implement in their practices. So over to you, sir. We can start the session with the first talk.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for so much. So I'll be sharing my slides. So I'll be speaking about, what protective measures we can take against this COVID-19, which is, undergoing a lot of metamorphosis all the time, and so this is my photo, which I just took yesterday of my OPD, how we are working. You can see that there is a lot of, sanitization here. And my full OPD is like open, these are the doors here, windows here, which are open out. And there's a door here of the entrance. So, we have kept the full place very open, and we have good spacing between patients who are sitting. There's a lot of sanitization. There's UV lights which are there here, though they are not on now, but they are used when after the OPD is closed, and then we sanitize the full place by using multiple UV lights in this here in the tube light. They are available as tube lights itself, very nice, which Dr. Abhishek would be telling us there. This is a thing we have kept a little to keep a distance when the patient is talking to my receptionist here, so she doesn't bump into very, very close to her. And cross ventilation is the key, I feel now. Initially, we thought it was droplet, but I think now we are very sure that it's all airborne. So, the bacteria the virus do stay in the medium, floating about for a few hours. This is my consulting room. So here, first thing is that there is no seating. I've removed that 2 chairs which we had of the patients used to sit next to me and discuss. Here, I don't know, this is looking very transparent, but I've got a very big sneeze guard here, which is like, how you have at the counter in the banks and everywhere, you have a transparent, a sneeze guard, which I got from Amazon, which is a very nice device, which, sort of tells the patient that, stay away from me, It's very effective if you have, something which is droplet borne, but in a airborne, I think, it's not that important, but it creates a sort of a, impression to the patient that, he should keep a distance. And this is my OCT here, where the patient sits here and I stand a little away from him. We have minimum talking, this is the slit lamp guard, which we have, the sneeze guard again, which we apply on the oculars, which were made by Zeiss and also by local people. In the very initial stages, I had to use, indigenous modification by using X-ray films and everything. So over these 1 year, we have evolved ourselves, and now we are into the vaccination stage. I was very skeptical when this thing started that how soon we'll get the vaccines, but our scientists have done a great job of getting the fastest, vaccine delivery within a year, So I think a rapid coverage of the whole population and a widespread coverage is very important in these patients, I think, to control this disease is what I feel. So technology has to be used to the maximum, though elder doctors like us are still learning technology, but we are getting to learn more and more. So I have moved on to Google Pay for most of my patients, if they can, that's the easiest way which we can, pay without losing money out to the credit card companies, where they charge you a lot of premium on every transaction. So far, I find Google Pay is the easiest and a very sort of glitch-free system to transfer money very easily. Then the teleconsultations, which will be discussed in detail, you have, you can have, various sort of programs like, on the Apple platform you have, which you can, actually do a video consult and see the patient and discuss with him and, take a close-up of his eye. Like I had one patient, for example, who was saying, I've got redness in my eyes. So I just said, you take a photo and send me, or do a FaceTime with me. Then immediately I saw on his face, he had multiple herpes zoster papules, pustules in the region of the ophthalmic division, And so I realized that, oh, this is not a red eye or a pink eye, and it's a herpes zoster. So just by this simple consultation and get a close-up of the eye and the face, we could pick up quite a few things, like even scleritis, or maybe, sometimes the ciliary congestion versus a pink eye, with these advanced technologies. So in OPD procedures, what I basically say is that no mask, no entry. I think, we provide patients with masks who don't have at our reception, and we sort of tape up the nose part of the mask, so he doesn't try to, because every time a patient puts his chin on the slit lamp, the first thing he does is he brings his mask down over the head as I'm examining his mouth, like a dentist. So I would say that no mask, no entry, and tape the mask over his nose, like how we do in the OT2. So it works 2 ways, that the patient can't pull it down. Usually they don't pull it up, and then it prevents the fogging of the eye when we are examining also, and it acts as a good sort of, safety precaution for the patient also to be aware that the mask is extremely important in this clinic, and you triage the patient down. On the ground floor itself, I have my OPD boy who's got a thermometer, a non-contact thermometer. So a patient with fever and sore throat or cough is straight away told to go back home unless he has an emergency. and symptoms of loss of taste and smell, as we are aware of, or breathlessness, any other symptoms which are suggestive of COVID. We also have a pulse oximeter in our OPD at the entrance if a patient wants to check it. That's the easiest thing I think we can do in these times, for the happy hypoxia, which we are aware of. In the first pandemic, first wave, when we were just learning, we were actually very, very scared and we were just sitting at home. But the second wave has made us a little more braver. At least I'm a little more brave, and our we have sort of become a little more lax, you could say, because we are learning more and more about the disease, and we are also vaccinated. That makes us more confident in these times. So have you been in contact with anyone who has COVID-19 in your house, your friends, in the last 2 weeks? And are you from any containment zone or zone where there are too many cases, like, which we are aware of? So this is how our waiting room looks like, it should look like. I showed you my photograph. In Bombay. We don't have the ability to have such large consulting rooms, but if you could have a larger waiting room with more distancing and getting patients on appointment basis would, I think, solve a lot of problems of social distancing and frequent sanitization of the place itself, using sodium hypochlorite solution and and UV light again is what I again would suggest, which we have now. And just reduce the attendance in your clinic, like, with these old people. I've seen 2 people coming, 3 people coming sometimes, so I think if you make it strictly 1 attendant per person, or if it's a healthy young man or woman, no one should come, that also is important, is what I feel, to reduce the number of people, So I think talking less is advantages in various situations in life, as we have learned. I think keeping your mouth shut works even for COVID. So I think speak less, so you have less of droplets coming out from your mouth and less of sort of so I try to be sort of telegraphic in my even consultation when I'm talking, and like patients keep on asking questions after question, and we tell them that it's not that I'm worried that you will get from me COVID, that I will get from you COVID. I tell them that I go to 10 hospitals and I'm worried that you will get from me COVID. So that makes them more positive, rather than otherwise you tell them to go away, they feel that we are scared of them. I try to put it the other way, that you should be scared of me because I'm the guy who's going to 10 hospitals and, might be infected. So they take that in a very positive way, So I think masking, double masking, and N95, which is now very freely available. I think it's a stupidity to wear any other cloth mask or any of these rags which we wear or these patients wear. I think we should all do a 3-ply mask now. There is no shortage. Or we should use these N95 masks, which are use and throw, because they have become quite cheap now. So as I've shown here, as per the iOS guidelines which were there when we started out, we were like, really looking at this per verbatim, and now everybody has found this sweet spot where to do well. So you have a 3-layer medical mask, N95 for your optometrist and yourself. Gloves, actually, I'm not very sure. I was using gloves initially, but I found it very uncomfortable. So nowadays, I don't wear gloves, at least individually, but I think we should leave that to the individual surgeon. And I used to sanitize my hands very often. And face shield also I'm not using anymore nowadays, So because that's a big hindrance for my indirect ophthalmoscopy, I've realized that. So front desk, you finish the maximum patient interaction, history taking and everything. So when it comes to you with the optometrist, there is, minimum sort of talking, is what I feel that is. And self-dilatation is what I suggest to the patient. If he can dilate from home, if he can come, or he pulls down his own eyelid and we just instill a single drop in his lower fornix, I think optometrists really help us a lot in these times, because they are the frontline workers, I would say, who take the history, do the NCT, do the basic refraction, which is, time consuming. And I think you should look after your optometrist and give them, high safety gear, which I give my own optometrist. You might wear a gown, but I don't suggest disposable gown, because I think the next epidemic, which I would say we will have, is of, waste produced during pandemic 19. I think the way I'm seeing masks and these PPEs lying around, like rotting all over the place. I mean, that's the next pandemic, which we will suffer much more, after this COVID goes away. So try to reuse, these gowns which we use, which can be washed and autoclaved and reuse, And cleaning every trial frame after every use with a spirit swab. This again, as I showed you, barrier between you and the patient, both are masked, and minimum talking is what I feel is the way to go. this is a trick of using a X-ray, to protect yourself. And these are the APO guidelines and how will you sterilize yourself from COVID, because the first warrior who died COVID was an eye surgeon who was warning the Chinese government, and poor fellow, nobody listened to him, and they tried to suppress him and he was lost. So, 1:10 bleach solution, sodium hypochlorite, sodium peroxide, hydrogen peroxide, I think, is little difficult for at least these optical instruments of us. And so isopropyl alcohol I've found is the best, to wipe properly for 5 minutes. So this is a point which I want to share with you all, that COVID-19 is an enveloped virus, and tonometer tip cleaning with 70% alcohol and allowed to dry is effective, But for adenovirus, which is quite common in our eyes, these are much more resistant to alcohol and require bleach in them. So this is the EU guidelines which I wanted to share with you all, that, try to reduce the number of patients coming to you if they have a rare disease which can wait, like retinal dystrophies or chronic retinitis pigmentosa type patients. Triage your important patients. Like, the first patient I treated during the first wave was a retinal detachment. He called me up about detachment. I told him, I'm not doing anything because I don't know what to do. Then there was another patient. So I got brave. And in the first month itself, I did 2-3 detachments, and I did a vitrectomy in all of them and tried to finish as early as possible. So I think anti-VEGF injections are a very important thing, and we want the patients to come back to prevent irreversible blindness. Eye emergencies are also not to be taken very lightly. I was actually going to my ROP screening, for my preemies throughout the pandemic, and we had to do them because there's no two ways about it. So we have to be like, So personally, what I do is sanitize my hands and surfaces after every patient, wash my hands after every 3-4 patients, keep my staff to minimum around me, keep the patients minimum around me, and try to keep as many possible over telephone consultations or, over phone. And if any of my patients my staff show symptoms, we immediately tell them to rest at home and get yourself investigated. So patients are equally frightened and unsure as we are, acute uveitis, acute glaucoma, retinal detachment. I saw a couple of patients, COVID uveitis I have seen with, Poschner-Schlossman. So I think,
Sorry to interrupt, sir, but the time is up. You need to conclude. I'm really sorry.
Okay. Yeah, fine. No problem. This is my last slide. So patients with other disease should also be counseled, and we should be aware to spot the treatment and come to us in time. So atypical manifestations of COVID, you should keep it in mind with mucormycosis coming up in big time. Thank you very much for your very patient hearing. Thank you so much. So Abhishek, I would request you to
I think
invite the next
one more thing
speaker. Yeah, please.
Yeah, I think to the moderator, to the hall moderator, I think Mr. Sanjay, the time allotted to everybody is about 10 to 11 minutes. We have sufficient time. So don't worry about the time. I think next on the list is Dr. Raju, who will be talking to us about air handling and circulation in OPD and OTs. Dr. Raju, you can please share your slides. Dr. Raju, you are muted.
Yeah, can you hear now? Am I audible?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You're audible.
Yeah. So I will be speaking to you today about the air handling and circulation in OT and OPD. As soon as we bring about this topic, the big question in everyone's mind is, do I need to make infrastructure changes in my current setup? This is the most common question that I keep facing. So what changes do I need to do in my OPD? And what changes do we need to do in our OT? Well, for the last 18 months, we learned many things from our experts. And we also unlearned many things. Both the experts as well as us unlearned many things as we gained experience. That is because of our improved understanding. We have better testing availability now, and we also have vaccination. So our ideas and our approach has changed. Well, I am no expert in air handling. I am in the same boat as you are all with respect to air handling and circulation in OT and OPD. But in this presentation, I'll try to help you to answer these questions in the correct way with information from reliable sources. And the basis of this presentation is based on this document published by the Indian Society of Heating, Refrigeration and Air Conditioning Engineers. This is the society which has all the air conditioning engineers of India, and they have brought out this wonderful guideline and we should follow them. As far as the transmission is concerned, we are all aware of how it transmits. We are also aware of the various droplet sizes, the distances they travel, and the float time for each of these particles. Our problem is with the small particles which can stay suspended in air for a long time. So what is ventilation? Ventilation is a process of providing outdoor air to a space or a building by natural or mechanical means. It controls how quickly the air is removed and replaced over a period of time. In some cases, it is necessary to remove the pollution from the outdoor air using filtration systems before it is introduced into the space. So what the ventilation does is a very critical role of removing the exhaled virus-laden air, lowering the overall concentration, and hence it reduces the dose of what is inhaled by the occupants. Hence, a good ventilation system protects the occupants against airborne transmission. However, we must understand that we cannot increase the ventilation rates as and when needed because it is limited by the original design specifications and the implementation. So how can we improve the air quality? Some of the things that we can do is to increase the ventilation rate, or what is called as the air changes per hour. So in mechanical systems, this has to be done by an AHU expert. It has to be recalibrated by them. We cannot meddle with that. As far as naturally ventilated systems, so what we can do is use the doors and the windows. So here we can open the windows and the doors as much as possible to increase the ventilation. However, it would depend on the local factors, the temperature and humidity in various locales. Second thing is to avoid recirculation as much as possible, especially in small closed spaces. If we can't avoid it, then at least we should add a filtration system. The air filtering can be done by using various air filtering devices. The purpose of them is to reduce the suspended particles or the indoor dust, which actually carry the virus all around the room. Next is to consider effective disinfection. That is, you can consider the UV light either into the room or in the ducts, and make sure that you have adequate surface disinfection to reduce the bioburden, because this dust which has got settled again gets resuspended, and this again can cause infection. Next, as told by Dr. Ajay, reduce the number of occupants in the room, spend less time with less occupants, and add an exhaust. So these are the ways by which we can improve the air quality. So this is a diagrammatic representation showing all the things that I just told you. If at all you have to use a recirculation unit, make sure that you can add a cleaning and a disinfection in between the time when it recirculates. That will help in reducing the load inside the room. Coming to the relative humidity and temperature, it's important that we maintain the relative humidity between 40 to 60. The room air conditioners would reduce both the temperature and the humidity, while the evaporative coolers will only reduce the temperature. A comfortable temperature of 24 to 30 degrees is what we should try to achieve. Coming to our OPD, most of us use air conditioners, and these are recirculating units. So what we should do is to slightly open the windows and the doors so that air can enter from outside, not have a very closed airtight system. You can also add a fresh air intake through a fan filtering unit. So this will be an infrastructure, new infrastructure that you may have to add. But most of the times this would not be required if you are able to open the doors and the windows of that room. This is what I have done. You can see the door and the window both are open in my consultation room. This is what I've been doing, and I have not done any other extra changes. Other thing is to add an exhaust. The exhaust has to be added in the wall opposite to the air entry point. So this will make sure that the air traverses the room. Do not add the exhaust very close to the input. Another thing that we have to do is to ensure that the draft of the air unit is not directly directed at the occupants, rather it should be directed away towards the roof. So this is how the direction of the air should be there when you are using a split AC. Then coming to the evaporative coolers do not have air filters as original equipment. So this we can fit air filters into them. And we should also make sure that we keep the windows open to release the humid air. Portable evaporative coolers do not draw the outdoor air, are not recommended. Coming to the portable room air cleaners, again there are two types. You have the passive type, that is the HEPA filter types, and the active type, the UV and the anionizer types. It's important to understand they will not protect the people from direct droplets or surface contamination exposure, but will reduce the indoor concentration of the contaminants through action of dilution. So they'll remove these contaminants, hence make the air less contaminated. When you are using active systems, we have to make sure that we understand the single pass efficiency of that system and also possibility of harmful byproducts. As far as air filter is concerned, another important point that we should all consider when you are buying an air filter or a fan filtering unit is the CFM of that machine. So for a room size of 100 square feet with a roof height of 10 square feet, the suggested air changes are about approximately 9 to 10. So you should look at this value. So you require about 166 CFM value for that machine. For most OPD, our size of the OPD will be 12 by 12 into or 12 by 15. So for that size of the OPD, you make sure that you have a machine which has got a mentioned value of CFM of 240 to 300. So when we are buying the machine, we have to look at this particular specification and then buy it. As far as ionization dispersing products are concerned, these disperse charged products into the air, particles into the air, and the ions are attached to the dust what is there, and then these particles actually settle onto the surfaces, either the wall or onto the furniture. So they are actually not removed. They adhere to the surfaces. So it is important that we have to do a thorough disinfection of these surfaces again. Coming to the OT, the most common HVAC systems that we all commonly use in ophthalmic setups are the split ACs. They are the recirculating units. We can have a fan units also can be added in this patient, in these OTs. The next commonly used system is the independent air handling units, which are positive pressure ventilation systems with a terminal HEPA. While very big hospitals have OT complex with a central air conditioning which is supplied through ducts, or you may have a OT complex with a central AHU with positive pressure ventilation and HEPA. So these are the various systems that are available for all of us. As far as the split ACs are concerned, this is not recommended in the current COVID situation. However, most of us will be forced to use these systems. So we can improve this system by using or adding a fan filtering unit with HEPA. So keep the door slightly open. Our adjacent room should have also a fan filtering unit. And additional powerful exhaust fan with HEPA can also be used when you are using this split ACs. As far as the individual HVAC system or the AHU is concerned, these are positive pressure ventilation systems wherein you have a supply duct, then you have return ducts. The return air goes back to the system along with fresh air intake, again, the same air is supplied partly to the OT. So this is an example of an OT with AHU. So are these okay in COVID situation? Now we had a lot of confusion. Various guidelines came out, but it's important to remember these are quite safe, and these have to run at full capacity, and they should not be stopped during the procedure. And as per the guidelines of the Royal College, the rapid dilution of these aerosols by the operating room ventilation will protect the operating room staff, and air passing from the operation theatre to the adjacent area will be highly diluted and not considered as a risk. This is what it says. However, if at all we want to add a negative pressure, we can do it without modifying the existing OT by adding what is called as an airlock. So just if you have a room adjacent to the OT, a negative pressure sink can be created to prevent the spread of infection. So what is basically done is, in the room adjacent, a powerful exhaust with a HEPA is added. This will suck the air out of air out of that room. The OT will continue to be at positive pressure, hence, and the adjacent area will also remain same. And this negative pressure sink will prevent the infective items or the infective air from the OT getting onto the general outside area. As far as the negative pressure OT is concerned, this would be required only if you're treating COVID positive patients. And most of us may not be doing this, so this will be restricted to institutes. Here, the same OT will have to have another exhaust which is powerful, so that it removes the air faster than what is supplied, and with respect to the surrounding area. So hence it becomes a negative pressure, and the air here would be coming from the clean corridor into the OT. As far as the central HVAC systems are concerned, these are actually very complicated. I will not delve into them. It is better to consult an air handling expert if at all you have to change anything in these systems. Then the next question was HEPA versus ultra HEPA. So this was also making the rounds when we were discussing the last year. Again, it's very important to understand what is the concept of most penetrating particle size. So the filtration efficiency will be higher for all particle sizes, either smaller or larger than the most penetrating particle size. So for most penetrating particle size for HEPA filters typically falls between 0.15 to 0.25 microns. So if anything is smaller, it's very important. If anything is smaller than this, also will be filtered efficiently by the HEPA filter. That is very important to understand. And this is the concept of the most penetrating particle size. So what is more important is to have a correct HEPA filter which is certified and is called as a Hess-Ketin filter. As far as the OT is concerned, as I told you,
to interrupt, sir,
to have HEPA filter with.
Please conclude the presentation. I'm really sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, we have enough time. I think I'll just last 2 slides, please. Your timer doesn't show up. We cannot make out.
It's on top of the.
Okay. Wait. So the air handling recommendation is to have minimum staff. No, do not open the OT door. And after finishing the case, run the AHU for at least 20 to 30 minutes before you take up the next case. Whether you have to do the infrastructure changes, it depends on what type of patients you are treating. If you are treating mainly the COVID negative patients, then ideally speaking, we may not have to do too many changes. We may just have to redesignate the areas, modify the existing infrastructure, and prevent the spread of infection from patients and hospital staff. Thank you very much.
Excellent talk, Raju.
Thank you, sir.
So if you could just tell us 2 points which we could take back home, practical points, which is like, not complicated. What should one do, in our OPD, and 1 point in OT, one take home point.
If you're going to use a split AC, most of us would be doing, keep your doors and windows open. Great. And add a filter into your room. And for choosing the filter, use the correct CFM based on your room size.
Lovely.
There are filters, available that you can put on top of the filter that is there in the AC. There are, foldable HEPA filters. Of course, it will reduce the AC efficiency quite a bit, but you can do it at least. I mean, if nothing else,
So
you can do it.
basically, whenever we are adding HEPA, we should understand we are adding resistance.
Correct.
And
Exactly.
unless we have a fan which is able to overcome that resistance, it is actually doesn't work the way we think it to work. So that is very important to understand when we are talking about air handling systems. So HEPA has a huge resistance. So you have to overcome the resistance to give the air. Just putting a HEPA doesn't work actually.
And actually, even for air handling units, if you want it to be protective against corona, you need that ultra HEPA, which increases the load on your machine significantly. If you want it to be a 99.9%.
Abhishek, I tried to make that point very clear. There's something called as most penetrating particle size.
Correct.
So anything below that also is filtered. That is again very important to understand. Anything below is because of the Tyndall effect. So that also will be filtered. So your HEPA would be sufficient for all practical purposes.
Right.
Raju, one point I wanted to ask you. My AC guy came because as you saw, my OPD was fully open. He said, "Doctor, आप ये क्या कर रहे हैं? मेरा AC जल जाएगा." Means it'll burn out. So he was having that problem. Like, doctor, you're not getting cooling and the AC is going to get burnt out. So what is the sweet spot? Like, how much should you keep your room open? Should you, you got what I'm trying to say?
I understand. So that's why I said it depends on local factors. So we may not be able to do the same thing everywhere. You have to keep your temperature slightly at higher level. You cannot keep it at 24. You might have to keep it at 28 or 29.
Okay, got your point.
So that's how you can.
There's another thing.
As highest possible.
That is another thing that will come in our slides. What we have done is that we open the window slightly behind me and have a fan which throws air, and then we have an exhaust in the nearby room, connected room with the door slightly open. So there is a continuous.
So you can do so that the air circulation increases. Basically, you have to try to remove the air.
Correct.
And dilute it.
So last question I would want to say, Raju and Abhishek, both. So now it's final that coronavirus is spread through droplet or through airborne. Can you clear that once for all? Because I've had 100 arguments with everybody. So can you just clear one doubt of mine? Sorry?
It's pretty clear now. There is enough evidence that it is spread both by droplets and by air. The only thing is that the droplet kind of infection, the contamination settles fast because the way the droplets settle down.
True.
But in the air, it stays for at least a couple of hours.
Yeah. That's so scary, I mean, it's what I want to see,
One point is that what settles down after it dries, it again gets resuspended.
True.
So that is why you need to do the surface disinfection and also add a filter.
Okay.
The filter will remove the water is getting resuspended, and disinfection will try to clear out what is deposited.
So last, make it very simple for people like me who have no knowledge. What is the one filter which you will advise us to buy? Simple thing, like simple. What you suggest one? The brand or the name or what? That.
Yeah, there are 2 or 3 brands. One is the Philips one, other one is the Conway, which have the HEPA filter with the specified CFM. So you look at the cubic feet per meter, that air transmission that is happening, airflow that is happening. Based on that, you need to choose.
You need to measure your room, calculate the volume of air, and then multiply it by at least 5, so that there are 5 exchanges every hour. And depending on that, you will have that CFM, and then you choose your filter.
For a CFM of like air exchange of 10 air exchanges, a CFM of 166 is required for 1000 cubic feet. That's how you can take.
Correct.
So that is the calculation.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thanks.
Great. Thanks. Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you. So I think I would like to invite now the brain behind this course. That's Dr. Abhishek Kothari. And he's going to speak to us about, which I found a very simple, straightforward method to fight this COVID pandemic, which is ultraviolet C light. How will it act in this war against COVID, which we are all fighting? Now, over to you, doctor, please.
Thank you so much, sir. Now, UVC light is not something that is very new. It has been around for quite some time, but its role during the COVID pandemic has been highlighted manifold. I installed UVC light in my OPD and my OT, quite some time back, and then I felt so gratified that it is helping us out in this time. So that's why I chose this topic for myself. Now, what is UVC? We all talk about UV light. That is the beyond visual spectrum light. It has a shorter wavelength than the blue light, so we can't see it. Now, UV light can be divided into three. That is the UVA, UVB, and UVC. Progressively as the wavelength shortens. So UVC has the shortest of the UV wavelengths. And the only reason all of us are alive and on Zoom and talking and we have evolved into human beings is because we have an ozone layer. Because UVC is so strongly biocidal that life would never have evolved on Earth if there was no ozone layer. So UVC is almost completely filtered out by ozone. And now that we've realized its germicidal capabilities, we are using it for our purposes. In UVC also, there are two bands. One is the far UVC, that is the between 205 to 222 nanometer light. And the normal UVC that we use, that is referred to light between 200 nanometer to 280 nanometer. Now these are slightly different. Far UVC has a very, very low penetrance, so that's why it can be used when you are around. Whereas when you are using UVC, you should not have direct exposure to that light. Now let's come to the history. Like I said, UVC is not new. More than 100 years back in 1903, was the first time that they discovered that UV spectrum is biocidal. And then in 1932, Ayres and Nuthling, they discovered that it is basically 524 nanometer. That is the most biocidal. In 1957, it was first used for TB control, and currently also the maximum use that UVC in healthcare has pre-COVID has been in TB control. TB wards have it, TB OPDs have it. And in 1999, WHO actually recommended UV germicidal light for illumination for TB control. The first time it was used as an antiviral control was in 2014 when in US they used it as in the biocontainment units for Ebola patients. How does it work? So the maximum germicidal efficiency is at 254 nanometer. Most of the UV lamps in use, they have a peak at 260 to 265 nanometer, and they have a significant amount of light at the germicidal range. So they are able to kill the microbes. So whenever there is an incoming photon, it basically disrupts the DNA of the microorganism, be it bacteria, viruses, or fungi, and that it basically causes a photodimerization. So even after the UV exposure is gone, the DNA cannot recombine back and start functioning again. So that is what happens with this. And you may all know that it's not new. UV, all of our houses have either an AquaGuard or a RO filter. All of them have been using UV light for sterilization of water since times immemorial. It's been a long time that it has been used. For air, in a lot of infectious disease units, they use these ceiling mounted system, or high up on the walls, they have something what they call as upper air sterilization mounts. Now, commonly, what are the UV sources that are available to us? The most common available is the Philips tube. They are the TUV T8 range. You have it in from 11 watts to going up to 36 to 40 watts. You have the same from Osram, both are German companies. There's no Indian tube light manufacturer that makes it. They are both basically low pressure mercury vapor lamps, and they're almost similar to the normal tube lights that you have. But the only difference being that the vapor in the normal tube lights is one of the neon gases, the non-reactive gases. Here it is mercury. Also, the other difference is that most of our tube lights are coated with a phosphorescent dye on the inside. These have clear glass, and the glass is such that it does not absorb the UV light. So that is also something that there are certain Chinese manufacturers, vendors, and things which are there in the market. But if the glass is not good, the efficiency of a UV tube light will drop to almost 10% if the glass is not especially made. There is another very important property of the glass in proper UV tube lights. This glass allows only the germicidal UV to exit, whereas it traps the even shorter wavelength Why is that important? Because even shorter wavelengths, they cause ozone formation. So if you use those lights, if all the radiation is coming outside, you will have ozone formation inside the room, which is unhealthy. It can cause upper respiratory tract irritation, and it can cause diseases also. That is why they say that if you've kept a room closed with UV light on for more than an hour, you're supposed to get it ventilated for about 10 to 15 minutes before you start using it. The other very cheap source of and very effective source of UVC is the LEDs that have now become available. They come as strips. You can have them light up on both sides or on one side, and we've used this quite well. One thing you have to understand, LEDs produce a fair amount of heat also. There are also broad spectrum UV lamps available in the market. Please do not go for that because they are completely useless. The amount of UVC produced there is much less as compared to B and A. So they're almost ineffective. Now, the lethal dose for SARS-CoV is in the range of approximately 5,000 millijoules. That is basically 108 millijoule of flux for about 50 seconds. This is not a very, it's not a very high range, not a very low range. It comes somewhere in the mid range. Most bacteria and viruses get inactivated at that. Fungal spores take a much higher dose to get neutralized. So even if you have UV, do you know whether it is effective or not? So there are these packs of 50 cards available in the market, which indicate the dose that whether the correct dose is being delivered. So the card is like this. It comes from American ultraviolet company, and if there is a 500 millijoule of irradiance, 500 millijoule per centimeter square, the center square becomes orange, and if it is 1000 millijoule, it turns pink. So you know that it is effective. In case in some corner of your room it is only 500 millijoules, whereas we want it for more, I mean, we want a higher value, then you're supposed to increase the exposure time accordingly. You also have these meters, dosimeters. I don't think we need to buy it because we don't use it that much. But if you really want to test every corner of a room, you can have these UVC light meters which tell you exactly the microwatt per centimeter square that is landing on the particular area. Now we have three applications in healthcare: surface sterilization, air sterilization, and instrument disinfection, where we currently use UV light. Surface disinfection, you have a wide range, you know, from the micro USB attachable attachment that I'm showing to these mobile and portable devices to these huge devices which you can shift from room to room. Depending upon the wattage of the light there, the UV light, you can have different exposure times, but anywhere between 10 to 20 minutes is the exposure time. You can easily shift these room to room, and these will always sterilize the surfaces that are illuminated. It is not going to work in the shadow. It has no indirect effect. So you have to make sure that the supposedly contaminated area is exposed well to these lights. For a room, if you want to make sure that your consultation room or your waiting room is sterilized, this is a rough guideline that is found somewhere in the literature. So if you have a 10 by 7 room, like an optometric cubicle, of 130 watt tube light is enough. But if you have something like a 10 into 13 or a 12 into 14 room, then either 2 30 watt or 136 watt for the smaller room and 2 36 watt for a bigger room, either on opposite or on in two opposite corners. You need this light to be able to achieve a kill properly. So this is my this is an example of how I have been using it. I have a UV tube light, I mean, at 2 walls, and again in my waiting room below I have one on this wall and one on the other wall. So we make sure that we switch it on whenever there are no patients, and that makes sure that the surface contamination is removed. UV is also very useful for mask surface sterilization. There are chambers in which on both sides you have UV lamps, and you can put your mask, and in approximately 12 to 15 minutes, you have a mask that is free of the coronavirus contamination. There are, for larger institutes, there are these kind of chambers available that are very effective in using them for mask sterilization. For air disinfection, also UV is used in a lot of the HVAC units. You see there are arrays of UV lights which make sure that both your filter gets all the viruses and the bacteria on the filters get killed, and in the air also whatever is there gets killed. These here the UV wattage is very high, so that in that very small amount of time, the very small contact time that the airflow is going to be there, they can achieve a kill. Philips also has these things which have a concealed UV light which you can install in your OPDs, and this filters air on a continuous basis. For small OPD instruments nowadays, a lot of these UV sterilization chambers are available where you can put your instrument in and switch it on, and in about 10 minutes you can get your thing sterilized. So we have something like this. This I designed long time back. This is using a UV LED. So we created an array of LEDs in between and surrounded by foil in a thermocol box along with a 12-watt source. And I think all of you can easily make it at home. So we put our 20D lenses, our trial frames, our scleral depressors, personal articles, sometimes the mask that we use for infants, the toys that we use for examining children, all that we put it here for sterilization. Are there any limitations of UV light? Of course, there are. You cannot use the normal UVC when the room is in active use. For that, you need the far UVC lights, which are a little difficult to obtain, the 222 nanometer ones. Some brands do produce ozone, like I said, and they can cause respiratory symptoms. So this is always better that if you're using UV light, if it's been on for some time, leave the room open for a short while, for 2-3 minutes is sufficient. Continuous UV exposure can cause discoloration of plastic. You see the top photo, that is covered by Zeiss. One is my fundus camera, the other which is not exposed to the UV light, and the other is OCT in my room. You see the amount of discoloration that has happened. So your plastics will look aged if you use them, if you expose them to UV light quite a bit. Apart from this, for humans, if you are continuously exposed to UVC light, you will have skin irritation. And I myself have suffered from photokeratitis when I was doing in the early phase of COVID, when I made this box and then I put up these UV lights in my home. So I got exposed for more than a minute and I got a severe photokeratitis. So this is how your eye will become red, and if you stain, you have a SPK kind of a picture, and it is really painful for at least a day or so. So these are the limitations of UV light, but otherwise it's a fantastic way. Don't go for these handheld instruments. You have these handheld lights which people wave. There is something called a contact time which is required. So fixed devices which stay without moving for at least 10 to 15 minutes are useful. And UVC has very effective germicidal action. It is easily implementable with minimum expenditure. It also reduces the environmental risk of our exposure manifold, can be used for sterilizing masks. But be careful not to expose yourself for long, because otherwise you have a very painful day ahead. Thank you so much.
Very nice presentation, Abhishek. So even I had that problem, I used to keep those UV lights on and I had that problem of getting, photokeratitis. So I think that's one thing we need to learn, when to switch it off and when to have it on. So you can invite the next speaker now, Abhishek. Unmute yourself, unmute.
Okay, so Dr. Deepa is going to take the next talk. That is, it's essentially a summary of all that we have said, plus a few new things, and how basically we make sure that our OPDs and OTs are run so that we have the least exposure and we are safe while examining patients in these times. So I think it's a useful listening for the coming wave, the third wave.
Yes.
Good afternoon, everyone. So in my talk, I am going to discuss how we can handle patients and manage them effectively in OPD as well as in OT. Most of the points have been covered in Dr. Ajay Durrani's lecture, so I'll be briefing on them. The first and the foremost one is the personal protection. All the staff who is managing the OPD will be insisted to wear a proper N95 mask. And it is a routine in our center that we issue 6 fresh masks every month to them, each individual staff. And the same can be sterilized by ETO over the weekend. And on top of it, we advise them to wear a 3-ply mask. And the face shield and the PPE kit both need to be worn only by the staff who is at the entry point. And the receptionist will have to use a face shield in addition to the mask. And the gloves are given for all the staff. Alcohol-based sanitizers are installed at strategic points for use by patients as well as the staff. So what are the modifications we require from a routine OPD practice? The consultation should be preferably given by appointment only, and walk-ins have to be avoided so that we can streamline the patient flow and avoid overcrowding. And the appointment slots in the early hours in the morning are to be reserved for elderly and patients with comorbidities so that they spend less time in OPD. And only one attender is allowed for a frail patient or in case of minors. Patients with history of fever, cough, or any contact with a positive patient should be redirected to the physician first. And patients who have already got an appointment but they develop fever or other symptoms can be rescheduled at a later date for consultation. And declaration is obtained from each patient and attendant along with the one ID proof. And it is also made sure that Arogya Setu app is downloaded and on patients and the mobiles of the staff. And continuing with the structural modification, we have to ensure that the entry point is a single where the temperature check can be done and other history can be asked, and hand sanitization is also done. The rooms are well ventilated as already discussed in detail, and the seating arrangements are spaced out. No touch hand sanitizers are installed at strategic points like near footwear storage, washrooms, and cash handling areas. And we have talked in brief in detail about the UV light. So this need to be used in the waiting area and the consultation rooms as well. So this can be used intermittently during OPD hours, like when patients are not there, and at the end of the day, which can be left overnight. And posters and snippets which showcase the precautions to be undertaken, sanitization procedures, and proper mask usage and social distancing protocols such as these are displayed at prominent points in the patient waiting area. And as already discussed, the airflow should be in such a way that it is directed from behind the consultant, the doctor, which is then flowing towards the patients, and then the side room, which has an exhaust fan, will be removing this air, and then there is a chance of fresh air which is being exchanged. And the staff education is also very, very important. They should be made aware of all the change in the protocols that are being formulated. And they are advised to schedule appointments with time gap between two patients so as the OPD and the waiting area can be sanitized. And they should also be educated about the frequent hand sanitization to be done in between patients. And at the entry point, the staff who is in charge is instructed to check for appropriate usage of mask. As in patients coming, whatever mask they're using, it is to be taped at the nose part. And if a patient is wearing a cloth mask, then they have to be given a 3-ply mask to wear above it. And in case of children whom the mask will be not fitting very properly, then it has to be either tied or looped behind the ear. And the attenders are also to be advised not to maintain distancing and not to touch anywhere unnecessarily. And the staff who is there in charge of the cash handling, he needs to be doubly careful and sanitize after each transaction. When it comes to OPD procedures, routine contact procedures are to be avoided. And after refraction, the frame and the instrument head, chin rests are cleaned with 100% spirit between patients. And direct ophthalmoscopy is to be avoided completely, and 90T also to the extent possible. And home dilation where feasible is advised to the patients as well as for ROP babies. And UV chamber is, as shown in the picture, is used for sterilizing occluder, 20 diopter lens, and depressor. And slit lamp shield has also been talked about, and it is mandatory. And investigations such as fields, topography are to be given appointment at a later date. Coming to the OT protocols, the procedures are to be restricted for emergencies such as lens-induced glaucoma, trauma-related procedures, and intraocular foreign body, retinal detachment, endophthalmitis treatment, intravitreal injections in one-eyed patients, or fresh AMD cases. Cataract surgeries and other elective surgeries like secondary IOL, SOR, ERM are to be deferred at present. Intravitreal injection, the patient can be given advice on choosing long-acting agents that can reduce the number of visits for the patient. Wherever possible, the general anesthesia is to be avoided as it is aerosol generating procedure because of the intubation. And if it is unavoidable, then the patient has to be properly investigated with complete blood count, CRP, RT-PCR test, and CT chest and X-ray. And the patient movement should be streamlined with no unnecessary delays. If the patient is a COVID negative, routine workflow with no delays are to be ensured, and minimum personnel need to be present in the OT, and personal protection are to be used. Again, the patient has to be taped over the mask, and it's always preferable to have a laminar flow, which can avoid the patient's breathing being directed towards the staff. And for GA, face shield is to be used by the anesthetist, and laryngeal mask airway is preferred over uncuffed endotracheal tube intubation. If the patient is positive, then he need to be taken only in dire emergency. And again, bare minimum staff have to be in OT. HEPA filter with UV and laminar flow is a must. The patient should also be wearing an N95 mask, which is again taped, and they should spend minimum time in OT. This can be ensured by keeping the OT trolley ready, and the surgeon also scrubbed when the patient has to be shifted. And PPE kit is worn prior to gowning, and as much as possible, GA is to be avoided. This is a modification we did in our center, which is actually a half PPE. That is, the PPE is used for the lower half of the body, whereas the surgical gown covers the upper body. And Schlieren imaging studies have shown that in a patient who had used the mask properly with sealed mask, the air currents going upwards is minimal, so that aerosol discharge is minimal. And as much importance is to be given for cleaning the OT after the procedure in any suspected uninvestigated case of patients or in positive patients. These scrubbing and gown removal procedure are very important. And after removal of the gown also, scrubbing is to be repeated. And the UV light is used for sterilization at least for 2 to 3 hours. And fogging needs to be done where laminar flow or HVAC is not available. And the terminal surface cleaning is also to be ensured. Thank you for your kind attention, and stay safe.
Very nice presentation, Dr. Deepa.
Thank you, sir.
I'd like to invite our last speaker, Dr. Abhishek. Please introduce the last speaker.
Dr. Rushad actually needs no introduction. He's quite well known in the anti-segment circles. He is one of the directors of Shroff Eye Center in Delhi, and he's a prominent anti-segment surgeon. He's done his fellowship from Narayana Nethralaya, and he would be talking to us on a very, very controversial topic today, that is teleophthalmology consultations, teleconsultations in ophthalmology, not exactly teleophthalmology. So there are several pitfalls. There may be certain advantages, but there are several pitfalls also. And how we can ensure a safe teleconsultation, I think Dr. Rushad will be able to highlight that. Over to you, Dr. Rushad.
Thank you, Abhishek, for that very kind introduction. I'll just share my screen. All right, is it visible?
Yes.
Okay. So I'll be talking on teleophthalmology and COVID consultations. As we know, on 21st March 2020, suddenly our world changed completely and we went into a lockdown. There was utter stress and panic at that stage. Patients suddenly could not visit the clinic. Our post-operative follow-ups became impossible. Ophthalmic emergencies could not be attended to. And we had to think of something fast to kind of help us in that situation. How to continue our follow-ups, how to keep a chain of communication alive with the patient. That was an important thing at that stage. Luckily, technology came to our rescue at that time. So why should one do a teleconsultation? I've just divided this talk into these few headings. One is to maintain a channel of communication. And as Abhishek said, there is a kind of controversy. You need to know what is the line, the fine balance in which scenarios you can actually do a teleconsultation and whether it's better to call the patient into the clinic. The second thing is it helps to allay patient anxiety. It's very good for follow-up patients. So say you have a chronic patient who you know very well, it's a very good tool to actually see those patients. and it enables you to actually reach patients in remote parts of the country as well. So just for example, I had a couple of patients who had Pentacam maps, and they had a diagnosis of keratoconus in Kashmir and in Jamshedpur. So they were taking opinions regarding that, and those are safe conditions where you can actually give an opinion safely to the patient regarding those conditions where it's not really an emergency and nothing major can go wrong by giving an opinion. What are the different techniques by which teleconsultation can be done? Well, there are certain WhatsApp-based platforms, there are app-based platforms, and then there are browser-based platforms. We, in our setup, decided to go on a browser-based approach so that patients didn't have to download a separate application to use in their phone. We tied up with a company called Radical Health, which did our teleconsultation platform for us. So for booking a teleconsult in our scenario, we asked our patients to access the website, and where we created a button for the book teleconsult option over there. OTP was sent to the patient once they had confirmed that they wanted to go ahead with the teleconsultation. And then you could actually log into the portal as a patient. And these were the different profiles that you could see. There's a facility where you can tie up for medicines to be delivered to the patients as well. Diagnostics, so we've looked at this. They were initially doing stuff like visual acuity checking at home. There was a calibration done with the help of your credit card. Although this never really took off because there were issues with the repeatability of the visual acuity we were getting with this particular modality. Then, of course, the appointment system, and you can create a profile in this where you can have multiple patients logged in with the same telephone number. Different people in the family log in and can use the same portal if there's only one telephone in remote areas where they may not have access to multiple smartphones. So this is just how the screen looks. It asks the patients a fairly detailed history. I'm not going to go into exactly all the details, but it gives options like regular checkup for under treatment for glaucoma or corneal disease, or whatever the condition may be. And then they can fill up certain symptoms that they're experiencing. It asks them aggravating and relieving factors and whether any other information they would like to give to the doctor. These are our doctor profiles that we created, so they can choose the specialist they want to see. Ours is there are multiple consultants in our center. So there are profiles created for different diseases, and according to that, the patient can select which doctor they want to actually consult. Another very useful tool has been this kind of photography of the anterior segment using smartphones. And these are images which have been taken by patients with their own smartphones and sent. And as you can see, on the one on the left gives you a fairly good view of the anterior segment. So apart from congestion, you can even see up to lens status reasonably well. The technique of taking the photo is something that Dr. Fogla and all described, which was to use the camera of the phone, which is not the selfie camera. You should switch on the flash while using this feature, magnify the image 2 to 3 times, look in a mirror, hold the camera about 10 centimeters from the eye, focusing by clicking while looking in the mirror onto the eye or the particular area that you want to focus on, and then click the image. And with that, you get a very good clear image of the anterior segment. So the patient can upload those images, as well as if they've had prior consultations, various different medicines that they've been prescribed, or whatever diagnosis has been made. So this is just an example of what actually the doctor sees in that portal. That earlier few slides were what the patient actually sees. The prescription itself, we have gone for what is an emailed prescription to the patient. It can be sent again on WhatsApp as well. What is very clear in this is that there should be a disclaimer also, and this is something I wanted to stress on, that it's an prescription that is provided based on online consultation. It is not a replacement for any comprehensive physical examination by a qualified ophthalmologist or physician. This is important. Along with, we have a consent form that they sign at the beginning of, digitally sign at the beginning of the consultation. This is important to safeguard ourselves against any possible liability in these situations. This is an example of a patient who went on doing a teleconsultation elsewhere, and actually ended up with this kind of corneal melt. You can see it's almost like a 360-degree melt with a hyphema inside. And then they finally came to the clinic, and there wasn't very much we could actually do for this patient. Her vision had dropped all the way down to PLPR. What had happened was there was constant use of steroids by this patient, and she was just so petrified of going to any ophthalmologist or getting out of her house that she kept using topical steroids for about a year. And it's very important to stress to these patients that you actually need a physical consultation. Don't keep going on with teleconsultation if it's not helping. It's useful for common ailments at this point in time. It's useful for common things like, say, dry eye, or if you have a map for a condition like keratoconus, or if someone wants a LASIK opinion and they have a pentacam, which they've done, and they want an opinion for that, or a simple red eye. And as Professor Dudani also mentioned, we have seen a few patients with herpes zoster as well, where it's useful to kind of look at their face and get that kind of diagnosis, but it can't be a replacement for physical examination with an ophthalmologist. We've also seen patients complaining of floaters, and then we called them in and actually had the retina team diagnosing RD and various other retinal emergencies. So teleconsultation is the future. I would say it's good to adopt it, at least to start using it, but it cannot replace physical consultation at the moment. There are certain devices that like portable autorefractometers, which certain optometrists are going to people's houses and doing the screening for them and giving a number. Things like that are getting more and more into vogue. We know the LVP model where they're doing tele-ophthalmology as well. So you have a technician sitting in a remote area, taking photographs and talking to the consultant regarding management. So these are all models for the future, which can definitely be looked at. So coming to what are the main advantages of teleconsultation, we can effectively use our manpower, as I said, in terms of deploying resources such as technicians or optometrists. You can reach very underserved areas for general conditions. You can give them relief. And if required, you can call them in for a physical consultation from there. It basically acts as a screening tool. It has the potential to target a much larger population. So you can sit in, say, Delhi or Mumbai and target someone sitting across the country. It's important right now to know that our rules for teleconsultation in India are very different to the ones in the US and abroad. So we are not actually taking any teleconsultation patients who are not based in India, because the compliances would be different in those countries. Portable technology enables us to do refraction and basic screening. And there are certain diseases like the ROP program in NN was using a form of tele-ophthalmology where technicians were going and screening patients and sending the images to the ROP consultant, and they were performing the kind of grading of the ROP. To conclude, incorporating a teleconsultation method in the pandemic makes sense. It prevents the patient feeling isolated and alone during lockdown. It's basically a way to allay fears. It provides a mean to examine patients actively suffering from COVID. So say someone's got COVID and they have a red eye, you can actually get a photograph and get a decent diagnosis from that. And once the patient recovers, you can obviously call them into the clinic. With newer tools, more and more examination like field test and visual acuity measurements are being looked at and are very soon going to be possible. And AI tools for retinal screening are also being looked at, and these ensure better utilization of manpower. So thank you. And hopefully the darkest hours of this pandemic are behind us, and hopefully a third wave doesn't come.
Brilliant. Very nice presentation, Dr. Shroff. So one thing I wanted to ask, actually, Abhishek and you, so you said we can do an anterior segment photograph. That is quite possible for y'all. Abhishek, what is our status for retinal photography? Like, there are some portable OCTs which are coming, and
Yeah, there's an Israeli device that they are working on, but I think it is still quite some time away from the routine clinical practice. But actually, I'll give you a scenario which actually happened with us, and the reason why I actually do not want to take up teleophthalmology, especially for new patients. So the exact example which Dr. Rushad said, this patient had a red eye somewhere in Bikaner and he sent a photograph, and to me it appeared that probably it's just a conjunctivitis or something. But because I said no, unless somebody examines it in a slit lamp, I'm not going to advise anything. And I told him to go to the local doctor. He did not go to the local doctor, and then he went to somebody else. He took somebody else's teleconsultation who gave him a mild steroid. And about 10 days later, the gentleman landed with an infiltration to the local ophthalmologist. And then he sent me a photograph and I said, my God, this is a full-blown corneal ulcer. And then he came to me, and by the time he came to me, it was beyond salvage. The eye got eviscerated.
Oh,
So yeah, so that is something that I was a little apprehensive. So all the red eyes on a camera photograph look alike. So whether to give these mild and we may be cautious, especially having been in institutes. It's drilled into our head not to take steroids jokingly. But a lot of people, especially in the periphery, steroids are their go-to drugs for almost everything. And the minute they see a little bit of redness, first thing that is given is steroid.
Yeah, Abhishek, we've actually removed the steroid option of our drops in the teleconsultation thing. We're not allowed to give steroids because it's not
Correct.
as an option.
Correct.
that's
Correct.
very good. Yeah.
Correct.
You have to kind of play it very safe in these patients. And this lady actually is a nightmare to manage now because she's got a 360-degree thinning completely all the way around. And I mean, what do you tell her? And she still refuses to come. I mean, I've seen her twice. And again, she's after this wave disappeared and continuously keeps asking me to give her treatment online. I've refused now. I mean, there's no way we can continue to treat her like this.
Correct. The same thing, there are these online field tests, the MRF, the Australian group that has developed this MRF. I've used it actually. I've used it in some of my patients. It is fairly reliable. I have this iPad-based thing in my OPD also. We've tried it and compared it to the standard Zeiss. It gives a very, very reasonably, very reproducible kind of so I think the only problem is that Fields does not tell you everything. You need a IOP measurement. So again, the patient has to pop in and see you at least occasionally. So
No, I think, but with these, these new instruments, like you could say, these contact lens based, glaucoma devices where they measure the glaucoma by wearing that, a contact lens which measures the IOP and sends it to you, to the doctor. That is a new technology.
Yeah, but then the problem is that most of these glaucoma patient, older age patients, they may not have ever used a contact lens before in their life.
True. Very true.
They may not be very comfortable using it.
Yeah, but I think for retina, I think I'm looking forward to, a handheld smartphone. Like there's this iPhone 10, the illumination and the camera is very close to each other. So you can use an iPhone 10 as a direct ophthalmoscope. There was a paper in JAMA. So I think if Apple and these companies come up with a very simple software, which we can, take a selfie of the retina in the future. And my wife being a radiologist, she's saying that most of the new radiology sonography machines are, plug and play into a smartphone. So we could get a sonography of the eye also, So I think the future looks exciting. And I think, these problems are a source of, new discoveries and new sort of ideas. So I think that's what COVID has thrown at us,
Right, sir. So any other questions for Dr. Raju, Dr. Rushad?
So I had a question regarding there's a scenario that comes up. So I don't know how many people are doing emergency surgeries in terms of traumas. But right now, what's happening is what is your protocol? I just wanted to ask the panel, what do you do if you have a large perforating injury which has to be done under GA? Are we waiting for an RT-PCR report in these cases or just sending it and then taking full precaution and doing that?
So what I am doing currently is that in the time that things get arranged, we get a CBC done and we get a chest X-ray done. And initially we were getting the HRCT done, but now we have stopped sending patients for HRCT. The CT center are so crowded. that if a patient is negative and he goes there, he's pretty sure to get a COVID infection from those areas. There are centers doing 50 to 60 tests a day in that small room of mostly COVID patients. So now we get chest X-ray and CBC, and we do send it for the RT-PCR. And we limit, like I said, that limit it to the minimum possible personnel. There's only the scrub nurse, me, the anesthetist, and one other person in the OT. And the next day, the minute the RT-PCR comes, we inform the team. If it's good, luckily we have not had a positive, but if it does come out positive, then everybody goes into isolation for the next 3-4 days, gets a RT-PCR done, and then comes to work. What about you, Dr. Raju?
Actually, I am purely into the private practice. I usually don't operate trauma right away, and most of them I refer them to an institute. Having said that, the practice here is that they are doing a rapid test in these patients, and if it is positive, then you have to take extra precautions. Even otherwise, the precautions don't change actually. So as far as for all practical purposes, you have to have the full PPE and take all precautions and do as you said. That's it. There is no going back on that. But if you have a bigger center where they are regularly doing these cases, for individual practitioners like me, it's better we refer them to a place where they can be taken better care of.
What I have observed is that lymphopenia and an elevated CRP, if I see that, then it's a very, very strong, it has a strong correlation to the COVID infection. Most of the times, there is actually a time where we had a lymphopenia, the HRCT had changes, but the RT-PCR came negative twice. Then we treated it, again, this was a trauma. So we treated it as if it's a COVID positive and did what I said. And luckily, all of us escaped. So I think that is something that we have to keep in mind. That
now that all of us have got vaccinated, I think the risk has slightly reduced compared to what it was, although new variants keep cropping up. So that's the good point compared to where we were last year actually.
So I think I'll let Dr. Ajay Dudani summarize, because I think our time is getting up, and the next sessions people are already here. So, sir, if you could summarize. You're on mute, sir. Dr. Ajay, you are muted.
So I think it was a very nice program, which we learned a lot from each other. And I think I liked the best part was the practical tips which everyone gave, simple things about using UV light, simple way to, do a teleconsult with a photograph, and simple way of keeping your, OT and OPD more open, to have the air transfer. So I think these are the simple take-home points which we have learned, and I think we'll keep on evolving and learning more. And hopefully, let's hope that there's no third wave, and we are through with this pandemic. So thank you very much to all the speakers and all the audience. Thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Bye.